Hello, my name is Ben Pink Dandelion. I'm part of a learning research team at Woodbrook, and this is the first of 4 short films on the history of Quakerism. In this first film, I want to talk about the very beginnings of the movement. And here I am in the Great Hall at Swarthmore Hall, the building that became the headquarters for the Quaker movement between 1652 and 1656. 1652 was the year in which the Quaker movement really took off. It was an amazing, long, hot summer of energy, of shifts, both in the political and spiritual landscape, and the months that saw huge numbers join what would become the Quaker movement. If you take one of the study tours that goes through 1652 country, as it's now called, you'll find friends near Pendle Hill and friends at Brigg Flats near Furbank Fell and friends here at Swarthmore near Ulverston, all saying, well, this is where it really began. And in some ways, all of those contradictory claims are correct in some way. On the top of Pendle Hill and on the way down, Fox sees a great people to be gathered and sees where they will be, dressed in white raiment, where a river divides 2 counties. When he gets to Sedbergh 2 weeks later, it's the time of the Whit hiring fair, and there are the flax workers dressed in white. And many of those and many of the seekers from the seeker movement in Westmoreland will become some of the early friends after his preaching success on Furbank Fell in the 2nd Sunday of June. And then a few weeks later, he reaches Ulverston, where Margaret Fell and her household welcome him in as a visiting preacher, and where Margaret Fell will be convinced in her pew in Ulverston Church through the preaching of George Fox. And we may remember that passage where she first stands in wonder and then sinks into her seat in tears, claiming we've been thieves, just thieves, stealing the scriptures, in a way professing without possessing. But let's go back. I'm already mentioning names you may not be familiar with, and ideas that need to be unpacked a little bit. For me, if we want to look at the beginnings of Quakerism, we'll go to that account in the Journal of George Fox, where he claims that in 1647, when he is still in the Midlands of England, where he grew up, that he was in a very low place. He'd already understood that to be a minister trained at Oxford or Cambridge was not, quote, sufficient to fit a man to be a minister of Christ. And so he then sought out the most experienced people, those claiming of spiritual experience and insight. But he says he found there were none among them all that could speak to his condition. And my hopes in all men were gone, so that I had nothing outwardly to help me. And it's at this very low moment, almost broken open with spiritual despair, that Fox then says, but then, oh then, I heard a voice which said, there is one, even Christ Jesus, that can speak to thy condition. And when I heard it, my heart did leap for joy. Then I could see why there was none upon the earth that could speak to my condition, namely that I should give him all the glory. For all are concluded in sin and shut up in unbelief as I had been. And this I knew experimentally. I knew this through my experience. So there's a lot in that short passage in the journal. I suppose the first and most fundamental element, and one that still is the basis of Quakerism today is this sense of hearing a voice, of direct encounter, direct spiritual experience. And this is what we aim for and seek for in our meetings of worship. It is available to us at any time, in any place. And this is partly why Quakers have never had sacred buildings and also never followed a particular kind of Christian calendar. Every day is Christmas or Easter, and every place is equally sacred. Life is almost an inhabited sacrament. So a number of things about this passage. One of the ways we can look at Christianity is to think of it as a long line of prophets who all claim that they have some new insight and they are, need to be particularly listened to. And to be fair, Fox does say people need to listen to him, but also very importantly, he says that this kind of experience, this direct encounter, is available to everybody. That in a sense, what Fox creates there is a church of the faithful, a church of ministers, everyone a minister, all equal before God, all precious children of God. And with that, we get a whole set of important consequences. First of all, Fox himself is not any more important than anyone else, other than he may have particular spiritual gifts, say in leadership or preaching. But everyone is equally important in the Quaker movement. We just have our own different ministries. From this as well, that no one is beyond the pale. Quakers are one of the rare groups to preach about universal salvation, that God's grace extended to everybody, a universal elect, very different from the Calvinist idea that had gone before, that only some people were predestined for salvation. And thirdly, though, that we also then get an idea that doesn't come through this passage, but through Fox's experience a year later, where he's taken through the flaming sword back into Eden, back into the state that Adam was in before he fell, and then into a more steadfast state, that of Christ Jesus, an idea of salvation and perfection in this life. So what we get is a very radical basis for the Quaker movement, and one that almost goes really right up against organized Christianity of the time. Everyone is a minister. Everyone can be saved and perfected in this life. And when Fox had said before he had had nothing outwardly to help him, it was partly because there was nothing outward that could help him. That this new and true spirituality was an inward experience. It wasn't that Quakers did away with the sacraments, with baptism and communion, but rather that they were experienced inwardly. An inward baptism, an inward communion, not the communion of 1 Corinthians 11:26 of breaking the bread until the Lord comes again, but of Revelation 3:20, those who hear me knock, I will come and sup inwardly. George Fox says this is our communion. So George Fox is the leader, the engine, in a sense, of the beginnings of the Quaker movement. But as Rosemary Moore suggests in her work, one of the reasons for the success of Quakerism is the breadth and depth of leadership. Everyone a minister, and a number of very, very able people are drawn to the movement. I've mentioned Margaret Fell already, a key leader and theologian for early Friends. We can think of others like James Naylor, William Dewsbury, Richard Hubberthorne, Richard Farnsworth. A whole breadth of leadership. It's possible in 1654 for about 33 pairs of ministers and elders to go on mission throughout England and Wales. And what's really important here as well to say is that Quakerism doesn't set itself up as an option in one corner in the religious marketplace. Fox and the other friends are clear that this is the right way to be in relationship with God, and that all of the other groups are wrong. So in 1658, there's even a mission to the Pope, and if that had gone better, I might have been making this film in Rome. That's another story. So what we get is a huge release of energy, partly amongst the dispossessed of England, what Francis Haugill would call the outcasts of Israel. People find a new, vibrant, viable spirituality that does indeed speak to their condition, that there are people with the right gifts to mold that, form that, lead that movement. And Quakerism will take off hugely as the most successful of the sects in the 1650s, helped by the lack of censorship during the Commonwealth, the fact that they're able to print freely, that they're able to move freely. And Hilary Hines talks of Quakerism as largely an itinerant movement. By 1660, some estimates put 1% of England as Quaker. It's a period of huge growth, and it must have been a very exciting time for the new movement.